It was the smell of low tide that Corvina Ashworth had always associated with the mathematics of poverty, briny and cold, and faintly rotten, like money left wet too long. She was 24 years old, sitting at a folding table in a rented room above a bait shop in Pemaquid, Maine, counting out 377.42 cents in bills and loose change, while the fog pressed against the window like something that had lost its direction. The change clinked. The fog did not lift. She had been counting every Sunday since her position at the Coastal Land Registry had ended 11 days ago. Not fired, eliminated, her supervisor had said, as though she were a marginal note someone had finally gotten around to erasings. She had worked there for 14 months, cross-referencing historical property surveys in a room that smelled of mildew and correction fluid, and she had been good at it, the kind of good that goes unremarked, because it asks for nothing in return. She was $2,284 behind on her student loan. On the table beside the money sat a postcard from her mother's sister, Frederica, who lived in Chestnut Hill and vacationed in places with cobblestones. "Come home, Corvina. There's nothing for you up there." Corvina turned it face down. There was also a flat river stone she had carried since she was 9. The summer her great-great-aunt Thessaly had pressed it into her palm and said, without ceremony, "You have the patience for cold water. Not everyone does." The stone was the size of a silver dollar, and almost the same color, smooth on one side and rough on the other. She had never been able to explain why she kept it. It was simply a thing that had stayed. Through the thin floor, she could hear the bait shop radio playing something with steel guitar. The man who ran the shop, a widower named Dougal, who smelled of rubber and dried seaweed, was humming along, slightly off-key, in a way that suggested he was content not to be in tune with anything in particular. Her phone buzzed. A 617 area code, Boston. She let it ring, and then she did not, because unknown numbers from Boston had a frequency that sounded less like bad news and more like the specific kind of news that rewrites the last several years of a life. The voice belonged to Stellan Burke, estate attorney, firm of Burke, Halsey and Croft. Corvina's great-great-aunt Thessaly Wren Ashworth had died at 91. She was named in the will. A reading in 4 days after she hung up, Corvina sat without moving. She picked up the river stone and held it, smooth side down, in her palm. Outside, a buoy bell struck twice and fell silent. The law offices of Burke, Halsey and Croft occupied the 4th floor of a federal-style building on Federal Street in Boston. The kind of address chosen to remind people of their own impermanence. The waiting room had leather chairs, the color of old money, and a credenza holding small bottles of still water that no one had opened. Her cousins were already there. Merritt Ashworth Price was 43, in cashmere the color of winter wheat, wearing a Rolex Datadust that caught the overhead lighting every time she moved her wrist, which she did often. Her brother Holden, 47, had the stillness of a man for whom rooms had long since been arranged before he arrived. Between them, on the credenza, sat 2 ceramic mugs of coffee the receptionist had brought without being asked. No one had offered Corvina one. Stellan Burke read the will with the rhythm of a man reciting train schedules. To Merritt, the Gloucester Colonial on Reynard Point, assessed at $1,847,000. To Holden, the investment portfolio balanced $623,420. To Corvina Marin Ashworth, Harrow Neck Island Merritt made a sound. Barely a sound, more a rearrangement of breath. Holden's stillness did not change, but the quality of it changed, the way water's surface changes when something moves beneath it. Harrow Neck Island, Burke explained, was an uninhabited rock formation of approximately 4.2 acres located 7 miles off the coast of Rockport, Massachusetts. No structure, no utility easements, no road access. Assessed by the county at $8,300, Merritt touched her Rolex without looking at it and said, with the particular calibration of someone choosing to be kind in a way that is not kindness. Thessaly always had a soft spot for lost causes. I suppose she thought they deserved company. Corvina did not answer. She had learned that silence was not the same as surrender. It could be a kind of waiting. Burke slid a small manila envelope across the table. Inside, a key, brass, old, hand-cut, with a paper tag tied to the bow in cotton string. Thessaly's handwriting, which Corvina recognized from birthday cards and pressed field flowers. Find the boathouse. Low tide. Bring the stone. Corvina closed her fingers around it. Holden was already on his phone. Merritt was speaking to Burke about expediting the Reynard Point transfer before the end of the fiscal quarter. Neither of them watched Corvina stand, put on her coat, and walk out carrying the envelope, and the whole particular silence of a woman who has just been given something that looks like nothing. She drove north on Route 128 in a 2009 Civic with 206,000 miles on it and a passenger side window held up by a folded piece of cardboard. The drive to Rockport was 51 miles. She stopped once for gas. $31.17 she could not entirely afford, and once on a pull-off above the water near Gloucester because she needed to sit for a moment and not be moving. The Atlantic spread below her, grey and enormous and indifferent. The ocean did not care whether you were right or wrong. It simply continued. She had arranged a crossing with Pershing Okafor, who ran a small water taxi out of Rockport Harbour. Low tide was 6:47 a.m. She slept in the Civic in a harbour parking area, folded into the back seat with her coat as a blanket, because the cheapest motel in Rockport was $89 a night. The cold came in around the window edges. She did not sleep well, but she slept, which was a distinction she had learned to honor. Pershing Okafor was a compact man of about 60, with hands carved from something harder than ordinary flesh, and he did not ask questions. He understood that people crossing water to uninhabited places did not always want to explain themselves. The crossing took 19 minutes. Corvina sat in the stern and watched Harrow Neck emerge from the morning fog. It smelled first of something old and mineral and salt-scorched. Not open ocean brine, but a denser thing, the smell of rock that had been wet and dried for a very long time. Then the cold rose off the stone shelves at the waterline, colder than the air. Then the hollow clack of her boots on the landing rock, and the soft hiss of retreating water between barnacled ledges. The boathouse was around a granite shoulder on the island's eastern side. A structure of salt-grey board and rusted hardware sagged on its eastern corner where a foundation timber had given way. The roof furred with decades of green-black moss. The padlock matched the key. She stood before the door and thought of all the ways this could be nothing. A mouldering pile of equipment, a family joke in legal language. Then she thought of Thessaly, who had been odd and precise and sometimes maddening, and who had also been the one person in the family who had always seen exactly what Corvina was. The lock opened on the third attempt. The smell that came through the door was dark and close and dry, ancient wood, mineral dust, and beneath it something else that did not belong to rot or neglect, something almost metallic, almost warm. She found a hand-pump kerosene lantern on the shelf just inside, and a box of wooden matches. The lantern's light was warm and particular, the light of an era that had not yet learned to be efficient. In the far corner, beneath a shelf of ancient crab pots and a coil of brittle rope, she saw it. A panel of newer wood fitted into the old planking, flush on 3 sides and elevated a 1/4 inch on the 4th. Deliberate. The work of someone who intended it to be found eventually, but not by accident. She cleared the shelf methodically, stacking the crab pots against the east wall, setting aside a rusted tin of finishing nails. The panel had a finger-cut hold on its raised edge. She worked her fingers in and applied steady pressure, not force, and after a long moment it gave, releasing a cold breath carrying that mineral warmth she could not name. The chamber beneath was 14 inches deep and roughly 3 feet by 4. She lowered the lantern. 3 bundles of heavy waxed canvas tied with tarred twine in the style of Gloucester fishing families circa the 1920s, each bundle the size and shape of a large hard-bound dictionary. Beside them, resting against the far wall, a tin document box sealed with yellowed paraffin. She lifted the first bundle. The weight startled her, dense and concentrated, not the weight of silver or documents, but of something that had been pressed by the earth into its own compressed nature. She unwrapped it carefully, working the knot loose. Inside were bars. 12 of them, stacked in 2 rows of 6, each stamped with a federal assay mark she recognized from her months at the land registry. Pre-1933 issue, produced before Executive Order 6102 recalled circulating gold. The bars were tarnished at their edges and sound at their cores, the color of something that had never needed to be beautiful. Second bundle, 14 bars. Third, 11. 37 total, each weighing approximately 27 troy ounces. She sat back on her heels and stayed very still. The mathematics arrived the way her mind had always worked when something mattered. Carefully, without theater. Spot gold that morning had been priced at $2,087 per troy ounce. 37 bars, 999 troy ounces approximately. Just over $2 million before authentication. Before the legal process, she could already see taking shape in her mind. The plain physical weight of what Thessaly had given her sat on the boathouse floor and did not apologize for being what it was. She opened the tin box. The letter inside was written in Thessaly's hand, older and deeper than the birthday card version, dated September 14th, 1962. My dearest Corvina, who is not yet born but who will be, and who will come here eventually, because the patient ones always find their way to the cold water. The gold was your great-great-grandfather, Aldous Ashworth's, brought ashore here in the autumn of 1931. I kept his secret because it was his to keep, and then mine to protect, and now yours to claim. The family has received their share. I made certain they found nothing remarkable. Inside this box is a codicil, written in Aldous's own hand, and witnessed by 2 men of Rockport in September of 1931, establishing that the contents of this chamber belong in perpetuity to the bearer of the key, provided they arrive within 2 years of the primary estate's settlement. A copy is lodged with an attorney in Gloucester. Her name is on the back of this page. I loved you before you existed. The stone was your grandfather's before it was mine. You have been carrying it home. She had just folded the letter when a boat engine came across the water, a larger motor than Pershing's, cutting too close to the landing shelf, moving too fast for anyone who knew the tides. She did not hurry. She laid the letter back in the tin box and set the box beside the 3 canvas bundles and pressed the river stone into the space between the first bundle and the second, smooth side up, so she would know exactly where she had been standing when she understood what she had. The man who came through the boathouse door was perhaps 35, wearing outdoor clothing that had been purchased rather than broken in, waxed canvas jacket, unscuffed rubber-soled boots. He carried a folder and wore the expression of someone who had been told this would be straightforward. His name was Cofield Renner, associate at Burke, Halsey and Croft, retained by Merritt and Holden Ashworth Price. How did you find me? Corvina said. Not a question. Prottery records were public, Renner said, studying his phone. They had known about the island. They had asked Pershing about the crossing schedule. Pershing, who ran a legitimate business and had no particular loyalty to anyone, had told them. From the folder he produced a 3-page document, stamped with the Burke, Halsey and Croft letterhead, and dated that morning. a deed restriction filed in 1962 by Thessaly Wren Ashworth herself, a family covenant clause requiring that any objects of significant monetary value discovered on or beneath the property be held in trust for the Ashworth Estate Collective until the primary beneficiaries had evaluated the claim. The clause had been drafted, he explained, as a safeguard against exactly this kind of situation. She had until Friday, 5 days, to produce documentation establishing that the objects predated the 1962 filing. Without it, the family would petition probate court for an emergency injunction, placing the contents in escrow. He picked up the lantern while he was talking. Not to see better, but because handling something was easier than standing still in a room where a woman was looking at you without apparent distress. She watched his eyes move across the 3 canvas bundles and settle on the open chamber, and she watched him perform the same calculation she had performed 18 minutes earlier, arriving at a number large enough to change the quality of his stillness. The bundles, he said, with careful neutrality, would need to remain on site. She looked at the tin box, at the document on the shelf, at the place where the lantern light ended and the dark began. She said, "I'll need until Friday." Caulfield Renner left. The sound of his engine diminished across the water. Corvina sat on the boathouse floor, opened the tin box again, read the letter a second time, and turned it over to read the name written on the back. Eugenia Marchetti was 71 years old and operated a 3-person general practice from a converted sea captain's house on Washington Street in Gloucester. She had been holding a sealed envelope from Thessaly Wren Ashworth for 11 years, with instructions to open it only upon notification of Thessaly's death. Inside, a copy of Aldous Ashworth's 1931 codicil, along with a signed and notarized letter from Thessaly, confirming its legitimacy and the chain of custody of the key. Eugenia read the documents with the focused quiet of a woman who had spent 50 years learning to identify what mattered. Then she said, "The 1962 deed restriction was real. Thessaly filed it herself, but she filed it knowing it would be superseded. The codicil predated the restriction by 31 years, Corvina said, and a codicil to a founding estate deed supersedes a subsequent property restriction in Massachusetts probate law," Eugenia said, "unless the restriction was established by court order. This one was a unilateral filing. The covenant clause has no legal standing against a properly witnessed codicil from the original asset owner." Thessaly knew that. She counted on the family not knowing it, and on you arriving here with the original document. The Friday meeting took place in a conference room at Burke, Halsey and Croft at Merritt's request. Her instinct, when uncertain, was always to put herself at the center of the room. Caulfield Renner led the presentation, the deed restriction, the covenant clause, the escrow petition ready to file. Corvina set the original codicil on the table beside it, the authenticated copy from Eugenia Marchetti's office. Beside that, a letter from the Massachusetts probate court obtained Thursday afternoon, confirming that the codicil had been registered and that its supersession of the 1962 restriction was a matter of established legal record, pending a formality hearing already scheduled. Caulfield Renner picked up the codicil, set it down, picked up the probate letter. His face did not change, but something behind it changed, the way a structure changes when you remove a load-bearing element. Merritt said very precisely, "This is not what you inherited." Corvina looked at her, not with triumph, with the expression of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has set it down. Not because she could not carry it further, but because she no longer needed to. "What I inherited," Corvina said, "is exactly what Thessaly meant for me to inherit. She arranged it so that the only person who could claim it was the person who knew what to look for, knew where to look, and arrived at the right time. You received what you were given. I received what I was chosen for. Those are not the same thing. The silence that followed was the particular silence of people who have heard something true, stated in a way that removes all available arguments. Merritt touched her Rolex. Not to check the time, because it was there, Eugenia filed the supersession claim that afternoon. Holden declined to contest it, less out of generosity than out of the recognition that a deposition of Burke, whose advanced knowledge of the restriction's legal weakness had by then become apparent, would not survive scrutiny. The escrow petition was withdrawn. Over the following 3 weeks, the 37 gold bars were authenticated by a federal assay laboratory in Boston, confirmed as pre-1933 mint production, and cleared under provisions for pre-confiscation private holdings. Corvina walked out of the building on Federal Street into a cold November afternoon and stood on the sidewalk with her face toward the harbor. The Atlantic smell came up from the waterfront, briny and clean and cold. Nothing like the low-tide smell of poverty, nothing like a thing that had been wet too long. She put her hand in her coat pocket and found the river stone. She held it smooth side up, the way it had always rested in Thessaly's hand. The final authenticated valuation, filed with the Massachusetts probate court in February, placed the 37 gold bars at $2,083,491 after assay fees. The codicil, which included a clause of fee simple owner of the island itself, added an appraised land value of $614,000. Total, $2,697,491, not including what she built with it afterward. Stellan Burke was the subject of a Massachusetts bar complaint, alleging knowing misrepresentation of the estate's legal structure to benefit the primary beneficiaries. His license was suspended for 2 years. The firm of Burke, Halsey and Croft dissolved in the months that followed, its principals practicing separately, which is the legal profession's quietest form of disgrace. Cofield Renner left the firm within 3 weeks and moved, as best as Corvina could determine from directories she checked once and did not check again, to a property management position in Connecticut. Merritt's portion of the estate carried a tax lien of $311, thousand against the Reynard Point property that had not appeared in the estate documents, discovered in the months after settlement. Requiring her to refinance at terms she would not have chosen and to forego a renovation she had already announced to her social circle in Chestnut Hill, as though it were complete. Holden's portfolio lost $188,000 in a real estate investment trust that collapsed the following spring. Corvina learned of it by accident through a brief item in a regional financial newsletter. She felt nothing in particular, which was its own kind of freedom. With a portion of the proceeds, she established the Thessaly Wren Ashworth Coastal Archive in Rockport, a preservation project that digitized and maintained historical maritime survey records for the New England coast. 3 full-time archivists, 2 part-time researchers, all of them people who had the patience for cold water and the conviction that detail mattered and could not be rushed. The archive occupied a converted sail loft on Bearskin Neck, and in its entrance room, in a climate-controlled case, she placed Aldous Ashworth's original codicil beside the brass key and the river stone, which she had finally, after 24 years, found the right surface on which to set down. On the morning the archive opened, she walked to the harbor before anyone arrived and stood at the waterline as the tide went out. The smell came up to her, cold and mineral and clean, the smell of rock that has been patient for a very long time. Some fortunes are made. Some are simply found by the person who understood all along that they needed to be looked for. The difference is not intelligence or luck. It is the willingness to arrive before the tide turns and to stay.